Welcome to 10th or Tuesday. This is episode number 29. My name is Michael Boldin. I'm joined by Mike Maharrey.
Hello.
And today is, Mike, the 418th day that the GOP has failed to get rid of Obamacare. So I want to talk about a few things that are happening on that front while we wait on Washington, D.C. to do things. Then again, there are a lot of people who've been telling us lately that, Donald Trump got rid of Obamacare.
Really?
This is absurd. Obamacare still exists
Right.
in a vast majority of the regulations and things that are going on with that bill. But in Idaho, we've talked briefly on this show, Mike, something that's going on in Idaho. Give us a little update.
So, yeah, the insurance commissioner and the governor, they put their heads together and they decided that the exchanges, the insurance products that were being offered that complied with all of the bajillion Obamacare mandates simply weren't working for the market in Idaho. So they opened the door for insurance companies to sell insurance that is not compliant with the ACA mandates. And like I said, there's just a bajillion of these things. And I think we talked about this in a previous episode, and the question was, would any of the insurance companies step up?
Yeah, that's the number one thing anybody says about any nullification effort that says, we're going to either allow or stop doing something. On the Right to Try Act, that was always a thing. No doctor's going to do this. Then, of course, a doctor does do it and saves a few dozen lives. The question then is, Idaho says we're going to allow these insurance plans that are not authorized by the federal government in order to help bring costs down. And that's the question. Will anybody do anything about it? And Mike, you did a report covering this.
Yeah, it looks like Blue Freaking Cross is going to step up to the plate and has already put together some I guess, high deductible kind of catastrophic plans is what it looked like from a quick reading of what they're offering. And they plan to have these rolled out in as early as April. So sure enough, the market answers, and it's not just the fact that the state passed a law or loosened up some regulations. The problem is this is desperately needed in the marketplace. And Blue Cross is just looking at the bottom line, and they're saying, hey, we've got people that are going to buy this. So heck yeah, we're going to offer it.
Yeah, that's always the tough part, because the bigger the company, the more difficult it is. When you generally the larger companies are like lockstep with the U.S. federal government. If the feds say something, they don't want to shake the apple cart at all, and many times they fear their bottom line. And that's why it was really interesting and not surprising that an independent doctor decided to flout FDA rules telling him not to treat cancer patients down in Texas. But a large company like Blue Cross being willing to do this, I mean, it still hasn't happened.
Right.
So we know that the Trump's HHS, who's the head of HHS? Do we either of us know?
I can't remember. It's
some monster who shouldn't have a job in Washington, D.C. because the department shouldn't exist. So it doesn't matter the name. The name is less important than what's going on.
Well, but, and with this administration, whoever it is will probably be gone in 6 months anyway.
True. So HHS sent a letter over to Idaho basically saying, hey, we need to have you guys enforce this. You can't start allowing healthcare plans that are not covered by the federal plan, the federal program. Basically, they're saying, I mean, in essence, aren't they saying in the letter, we don't like the law, but we've got to enforce it?
Right. Yeah, that was the tone, which I thought was kind of interesting. They were very deferential. We realize this is a need, and we understand what you're trying to do, but this is the law. It's that right-wing mentality. If it's a law, then by God, we're going to follow it no matter what.
But the interesting thing, and both sides take this view, is when it's a law that they think undermining it is going to undermine their power, they don't like it. Then they have to enforce it. But they never say this is the law when it comes to the Constitution. Never.
No, and that's a problem, since the Constitution is ostensibly the supreme law of the land. They like to trot out the supremacy clause, but the federal government doesn't follow the supremacy clause itself, because it's only supposed to be things that are pursuant to the Constitution, and it's doing billions of things that aren't pursuant to the Constitution.
So, Mike, have you dug into that letter, the letter to Idaho?
I've read the letter, and I've been kind of mulling over in my head how I want to approach reporting it.
Okay.
You know, it's an interesting dynamic, and in some sense that you can look at it and say, well, it almost seems like the federal government's kind of going, please, Idaho, please enforce this because it really needs to be enforced. And
I think it's going to make them look bad if they come
yeah,
marching into Idaho. I mean, first, of course, a lot of people that back the president and people like Jeff Sessions, anyone who's backing
right.
Jeff Sessions is absurd. But first of all, you've got people like this who are in kind of hot water because now they're pushing a bump stock, a gun control measure,
Right.
Especially from the executive level, even more nuts. Then a
Right.
couple days later, a good way to distract that is to file a poorly drafted and bad legal reasoning lawsuit. It does
Right.
really rile up the troops against California. Even where they could make the case against California on a couple of tangential issues, they just aren't doing a very good job on it.
Right.
Here it is over a year later. So many people have expected the feds to defund sanctuary cities. They're either hapless or they're just never going to get that job done. So I wouldn't trust them. But it certainly has distracted people from the idea that the federal government is not only enforcing current gun control measures, but pushing new ones.
Absolutely.
So all of a sudden, this might be the best head fake ever. If you think
Well,
about
yeah,
it.
I haven't really thought about it that way.
Can you
but
imagine
yeah,
if Hillary
absolutely.
Clinton got in? She would have tried to have banned bump stocks.
Well, absolutely she would.
And they wouldn't have had a single person cheering her AG the week later because of a bad lawsuit against a state. Well, anyways, so they're not in the most awesome position because, well, now they're going to be forced to have to put pressure on Idaho over Obamacare. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. My hope is that Idaho just says, you know what? Stick it. Try to enforce it. We know you don't have the resources, and then we'll see what Blue Cross does. So this is going to be really interesting to see how this plays out.
I think where the federal government does have some leverage, and they probably can't really apply any leverage to the state because we know that the federal government doesn't have the power or authority to force the state to enforce its laws or implement its programs. But it can potentially, and this is my understanding, what they were kind of afraid of when they rolled this out, that the HHS might try to fine any companies that are selling non-compliant, non-compliant insurance, and they can do this through the Medicare, Medicaid system, and of course, all of the insurance companies are wrapped up in that somehow. So it'll be really interesting to see how this actually plays out. But I think you're right. On one level, it's really a political question before anything. You know, will the administration be willing to crack down on a state that's trying to fix Obamacare? That's, you know, is it going to have the balls to do that? I don't know.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens with Idaho, Mike. Maybe you'll have a report on this over the next few days. Keep an eye out on 10thamendmentcenter.com. Also down in Florida, dealing with Obamacare, not directly, but that's a pun segue was intended. The Direct Primary Care Act has passed in Florida. We can just give a brief overview here, Mike, of what direct primary care is for people who have not watched this show on a regular basis where we say it almost every single week. Yeah. This is House Bill 37, which is waiting for a signature or a veto from the governor in Florida.
Yeah, this is kind of like Right to Try was last year. It seems like that this is something that's just really gained a lot of momentum through states across the country. And essentially what they're doing is they are passing laws to exempt primary care practices. Sometimes they call them contract care or retainer agreements. And what these laws do is they simply exempt them from existing insurance rules and insurance mandates and free them from being regulated by the insurance system. So it allows these direct primary care practices to thrive without intense regulation through the insurance system. And basically a direct primary care is just, I pay a set fee, like a gym membership for a month. And when I pay my membership, I get access to basic care that you would have at your normal primary care doctor. So I get, tonsillitis, I can go in and get some antibiotics. I don't guess you get antibiotics for tonsillitis. I get strep, whatever.
Have you noticed that if they cover like, do they have like add-on plans or anything like that? Can you get like an additional package with like bonus features? Or is that like...
I don't know in general. The direct primary care plan that I have is just a flat fee, and whatever it covers, it covers. But I don't see why you couldn't have a tiered system. You know, you pay X and you get this, and you pay Y, and they cover this as well. I'm sure somebody's tried that. Well, I
Right.
shouldn't say I'm sure, but it would make sense.
Eventually, someone will probably try
Right.
or start doing that at some point. So, Florida House Bill 37 is off to the governor's desk, and we'll be reporting on that, whether there's a veto or a signature coming up in probably the next week or two. So we'll be watching that as well. So moving forward, I want to talk about sound money, another issue that we've been covering very heavily this year. In Alabama, Senate Bill 156 removing, I believe, Mike, this is sales tax from the exchange of metals, gold, silver, either minted coins or bullion in exchange for fiat dollars. Is that correct?
That is correct. So if you go to the store or go to your precious metals dealer or go to a precious metal dealer show and you buy some bullion, you know, some gold coins, gold bars, silver coins, silver bars, you will not have to pay sales tax any longer in the state of Alabama. And I found an interesting thing when I was working on the report about it being signed into law. There's already a big company that does I guess it's kind of a traveling coin show, and they're saying, hey, now that the sales tax is gone, we're going to be able to have our show come to Alabama. So, you know, the ink's not even dry yet, and they're already seeing an expansion of the market. So, you know, that just goes to show that there are practical, real-world applications of these laws. Sometimes we get caught up in the policy, but it opens a door for people to buy bullion, to use it in transactions without having to worry about these extra taxes and extra costs.
Right.
The key step is for people to actually do it. So
well,
if you live in Alabama, go buy some bullion and you know, buy some stuff with your gold.
Senate Bill 156 goes into effect on June 1st this year. So buy it now, but buy it whenever.
Yeah.
Also on the sound money end is Wyoming House Bill 103. That is the Wyoming Legal Tender Act. Ron Paul recorded a video. It passed both houses there, and that was also off to the governor. Their session is over, so I think it's about a week or so before the governor has to sign. Give us a quick overview of that piece of legislation as well, Mike.
So this bill is a little bit more expansive than the bill that was signed in Alabama. It actually intentionally and specifically defines gold and silver as legal tender, so it puts it in the state of Wyoming on par with Federal Reserve notes, and it specifically prohibits any type of taxation on the exchange of gold and silver. So that includes sales tax. They don't have state income tax in Wyoming, but if they did have state income tax, it would include capital gains and then also property taxes. So completely eliminates all taxation on gold and silver.
In other words, it removes all roadblocks, at least on the taxation level, from getting in the way of it being exchanged as money the way it's supposed to be.
So what'll be interesting to see is when this happened in Utah several years back, it wasn't very long before a company was established to allow people to bank gold and silver and then actually use it in transactions. So you can use your debit
United
card.
Precious Metals Association,
Exactly.
UPMA.
So I wonder, you know, I would be shocked if you don't see a similar company set up shop in Wyoming or see a company like UPA expand into Wyoming with this door now open.
I think it's upma.org is the website, I think. Also, a similar bill in Kansas. I was just randomly looking through, as I mentioned to you a few days ago when I sent you the bill to do a report on. House Bill 2421 had been basically just sitting. It's a 2-year session in Kansas, and had basically just been sitting there doing nothing. And I just, on a whim, decided, oh, what's going on with a couple of bills? There's not many that have been filed to deal with federal power in Kansas this session. And House Bill 2421, after sitting around for over a year, decided to move it out of committee. So is that one just on sales tax, do you know?
That one's sales tax, so it's almost identical to the Alabama bill.
Okay.
And, I was talking to our friend J.P. Cortez, who's over at the, oh gosh, I can't even remember the name of his.
Is he with Money Metals Exchange?
That's the metals company, but they have it's a different organization that basically promotes sound money policies.
Okay.
And he said he's actually traveling to Kansas. I think he said today for some type of hearing. So I'm not sure.
Yeah, there's another bill, almost the same bill on the Senate side. So
okay.
I don't know if
so
they
that's
have.
what he's doing. Yeah,
Yeah, Senate Bill 437 is up for a hearing later today. So I'm assuming that's the bill that he's testifying in favor. But it's good to get people, like when you have organizations and activists that have the ability and willingness to spend the time to go and testify, when you have an expert there, it's much harder for the legislators who are opposed it to look like a moron, to oppose a simple bill saying, hey, you can exchange this for this without the state coming in and taking 10% or 5% or whatever it may be. So
JP does a great job with that too. He's kind of helped us with some of our talking points on this issue.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
It's really exciting to see that they're actually been able. I think he also went to Wyoming and testified on behalf of that bill as well. So when you see, you see this kind of momentum building, and you've got Ron Paul putting together a video urging people to call the Wyoming governor if you live out in Wyoming. It's really neat to see this kind of budding grassroots percolation of efforts at the state level to advance sound money issues.
And JP, if you end up watching this episode, you have to accept our apologies that we did. Neither of us did a brain fart on Sound Money Defense League. That's the organization. I just did a Google search. I don't know why I did not remember that as well. Sound Money Defense League. They focus solely on advancing sound money in various ways, between using it, supporting companies that actually want to use it for exchange, but then also doing this legislative work to get states out of the way. Because literally, if you just get government out of the way and allow the market to make the choice, then we can all learn. I believe personally that when the market makes a choice, they'll make better choices over time, because the negative impacts of bad choices aren't absorbed by socializing the costs, by spreading around the costs, and that's what government does. So that's why it's so important to get the market involved in the exchange of currency as well. So those two bills in Kansas. And then one other thing I want to cover in this shorter episode this week, Mike, is our work on surveillance, particularly NSA mass surveillance. Now that we all know that that's not going anywhere. In Michigan, the Fourth Amendment Protection Act that we've been covering, that's House Bill 4430. That is on the governor's desk as of last Thursday or so. So he's got, I don't know if it's a week or 10 days. Generally, it's something like that. In some states, like Wyoming, it's 5 to 7, or in Alabama, it's like 3 days. So.
Yeah, it's 14 in Michigan. I actually looked at that one today because I was curious. I'm antsy about that one to get signed.
Well, okay, so this is the kind of the base bill for states to pass to deal with mass federal surveillance. That is, the state passes a law saying that they will not provide, quote, material support or resources to warrantless federal surveillance programs. Now, that's a very broad thing, but it's very specific. It's actually taken in law. It's a phrase, material support or resources, is taken from the Patriot Act, but kind of used the other way around. They want to attack everyone as being a material supporter of terrorism and giving them the ability to wage war everywhere, whenever they want. So this is flipping it around. So any support. And the way we see that is like electricity, logistics support, communications, whatever it may be, to help effectuate those programs. Now, there's no NSA facility that we're aware of in Michigan, right?
That's correct. But when you put this in place, it makes it less likely that the NSA or other federal spy agency will look to Michigan as a place to go, because they know, well, we might run into some barriers here. And,
yeah, that's the whole point. We need to box them in. As of now, they've basically had free reign to expand their operations wherever they want to go. People only find out about their new facilities, like in Utah and Texas, or where they're expanding at HQ. The general public normally only finds out about it after the fact, after the contracts are signed. And then they're like, wait a second, what's going on here? But bills like this in Michigan, and then another which just passed the Missouri House Bill 2104, basically says you're not welcome here, and we're not going to participate in your surveillance programs.
I think there's another significant practical aspect that I'm not even sure we realized it when we first started developing this strategy a few years ago. And that's the fact that when you take away that material support, that means that no longer will state and local law enforcement agencies be able to collect data on behalf of these spy agencies and pass it on, or use that data that's being sent in to the state. So you've got this two-way street of data through these information sharing environments, through what are known as fusion centers. You've got the states gathering information and sending it to the feds. You've got the feds gathering information and sending it back to the state. It basically shuts that road off with all of this warrantless surveillance. And it's going to make it much more difficult for the state and the federal government to utilize this illegally obtained data. And they're using it. I just finished working on a report on parallel construction. And, this is an insidious policy that law enforcement using. They take this warrantless data, illegal data that they know is illegal, they know it violates the Constitution, and then they use it to develop a parallel investigation that hides that they got this information illegally. So when you start passing these types of laws that prohibit this type of material support, this cooperation with warrantless surveillance, then you create a wedge that you can put in that information sharing environment. And I think that's extremely significant, maybe even more than we even realize.
The parallel construction issue it's really instructive, I think, for what's going on. Because on the one hand, we keep hearing that, oh, this is totally legal for them to collect all this information. They are following the Constitution. They can do this. Well, if that was the case, why are they even doing this whole parallel construction thing? They wouldn't need to. They wouldn't need to pretend that they got it a different way if this was not an issue. So we know it's an issue, and kind of turning off that back and forth pipeline between the fusion centers, local police back and forth with federal agents, whether it's FBI or DHS or whatever, is huge. Now, that's not to say that we trust any level of government to actually do what they're supposed to do. But this is certainly adding another layer of difficulty in pulling it off. And Michigan is leading the way. We have to thank Dennis Marburger and Shane Trejo and many others in Michigan who've been working very hard. And Mike, you've been a monster on this. What's the representative's name? Martin
Horelak.
I
may not be pronouncing that right either, but he's done a really good job. I give him kudos for really working this bill through the process.
Yeah, and I know there've been complaints from people in the kind of the broad liberty movement about Martin specifically. He's the kind of guy, he'll file some pretty good bills and then never does anything with them. And so they've kind of taken that as kind of a slap in the face. Like, if you're filing these bills, are you doing it just to get us to like you and then not really following through? So there's been some distrust. And I don't know if this fixes that or not, but certainly, and you and I know, Mike, that he and his staff have worked very hard to get this bill dealing with warrantless federal surveillance to the governor's desk. I mean, of all places, that's huge. I think it only had one vote against it in the entire process. It was 37-0 in the Senate, and 107 or something to
107 to 1
in the House. So that's absolutely huge. The Missouri bill, HB 2104, State Rep Rick Bratton, who's filed a number of very good bills in recent years, but they just languish, and maybe he was one of those guys that filed bills. But then again, you have to think that the leadership never likes good bills.
That's true.
So sometimes it may be the person filing them and just trying to look good, but not really doing anything and being on the other team. But on the other hand, you have good representatives who file good legislation, or at least on some issues, and then they get ignored because they're trying to do the right thing.
Right.
So Rick Bratton
did a really good job here just from a strategic standpoint, because he filed this legislation as a separate bill. And I think it got dumped in an unfavorable committee. It never even got a committee hearing. So he actually took this the entire bill and he amended it onto a Stingray bill that was moving
Keith Frederick,
who's also been a good friend of TAC. And so he amended that language into the Stingray bill. So this bill is actually a kind of a combo bill. It has the Fourth Amendment Protection Act, and then it has a very strong prohibition of using warrantless stingrays to gather up cell phone communication or location data. So this is going to be a really strong bill, and it passed by a surprisingly large margin in passed the House, correct?
136 to 1.
Yeah.
So Yeah, I think the amendment that Bratton filed went through unanimously. He tried to get an emergency clause added to it, which would have made it go into effect immediately
Right.
because it was considered an emergency that Missouri may be helping the federal government engage in these warrantless surveillance programs. Well, we know that every state is actually helping. In massive ways. But this bill, dealing not only with stopping material support, but also stopping collection of warrantless data by and location data by stingray devices, it could be a great combo bill. It remains to be seen what'll happen in the Senate. If it gets a lot of attention, we know the first thing that they'll do is try to slow it down in committee. But we'll send out some action alerts to those of you who live in Missouri soon once we find out what's going on as far as committee assignment there in the Senate. If they try to slow it down, we'll put some pressure on. Then the next thing they do is they try to slow it down on the Senate floor, the whole debate, scheduling it for a vote. People will file kind of nonsensical amendments to get attached to the bill, or maybe a very small technical amendment, which again slows down the process, right? Because even if they pass it, then they can say, well, we passed it, but we just ran out of time, and because there was this small amendment we had to do, it had to go back to the House. So we'll be keeping an eye on that. They do a lot of those tricks in Missouri.
I was getting ready to say Missouri is notorious for, and in the House and Senate leadership, so your Senate president and your Speaker of the House have a tremendous amount of discretion in Missouri as far as even what gets assigned to committee. I remember last year, I think there were a couple of bills that the Speaker of the House over on the House side, he assigned them to committee like on the last day. So there was no way they could get a hearing. So these kind of tricks are notorious in Missouri. So folks that live out there, definitely contact your state rep, your state senator in this case for this bill, and let them know you support it so that the pressure can be building on those folks to get that thing moving.
So that was House Bill 2104. It was originally filed as a restriction on the use of stingrays for warrantless surveillance. That's from Keith Frederick. Then it also had on the floor, it had an amendment from Rick Bratton. There's also two Democrat co-sponsors, Carla May and Clem Smith. So this is two Republicans, two Democrats working together to deal with surveillance on the national and local level. Very good stuff. Hopefully we'll see that move forward. We're going to work hard to try to get that to happen in the Senate in Missouri. So we'll be watching both of those, Michigan HB 4430, Missouri 2104. And then at some point, Mike, we should start, let's see what happens with these bills, but we should start looking back here to California, the first state to pass any legislation along these lines, not as good as Michigan's, and it needs a little bit of a follow-up, but Senate Bill 828 from a couple of years ago when Ted Lieu was still in the state assembly. I don't know if he was an assembly member. I think he was a senator here in California. Yeah. So California was the first state to actually pass some type of restriction or a foundational step to cause a restriction on material support or resources. So that also shows us that if California, Michigan, and Missouri would all take steps like this, it isn't like one political party or the other. We can really put some pressure on states and take action where we know that it's never going to happen in Washington.
Yep, I'm excited about this. It's neat to see this issue getting some traction and getting rolling again. And I think if we get a governor's signature in Michigan, I'm hoping that we'll see what we see in a lot of states where you get one state passes something, another states go, oh, that's cool. Now they did it. We can do it too.
Yeah, so. Absolutely. And then if you follow up with Missouri, we'll certainly see some other states try to do the same next year. Some other bills, just to wrap it up, some other bills that we're watching, some big moves coming up in the next few days. Up in New Hampshire, they've been working to expand their jury nullification law for a number of years. House Bill 1443 just got a razor-thin approval in committee and is up for a vote as soon as the 15th. So I guess that's Thursday. So we'll be keeping an eye on that. And then an asset forfeiture restriction, a bill that would restrict state-level asset forfeiture, and then a vast majority of what's called adoptions, sharing with the federal government under the Equitable Sharing Program. House Bill 421 is up for a committee vote also on Thursday in Tennessee. And then in Utah, the raw milk bill, Senate Bill 108.
Yep, expands raw milk sales, allows farmers to sell on the premises of their farm without having to have any license, as long as it's under, I think, 200 gallons per month. Previously, you could only sell raw milk if you had a retail license, which was, a lot of hoops to jump through. So this will actually expand raw milk sales, and then also allow retailers to sell out of refrigerated trucks, which I didn't know that was a thing, but apparently it is. All I know is it expands the market, and expanding the market is always a good thing.
Man, a raw milk truck in Los Angeles would make huge money. I mean, just the food truck culture here. And if you put some niche product in it, people just flock to it.
Yeah, we don't have that in Kentucky.
Well, we don't have the truck here either. But the idea is really interesting. And especially if you have a mobile vehicle, then you're talking about maybe doing deliveries and all kinds of really cool stuff. So Senate Bill 108, which is sponsored by some guy on the Senate side and Representative Mark Roberts on the House side. And then one last one that we're watching, and that one's on the governor's desk. The Utah session is over. We're waiting for a couple bills to be signed. And then the other one is a pair of bills that expand Utah's Right to Try Act. Mike, the Right to Try Act basically says in some situations, we're going to defy the FDA and the federal government and allow people to give a shot at some experimental treatments. And now the Right to Try Act on expansion on the governor's desk in Utah will do...
It will allow those patients that are terminally ill that qualify for Right to Try, will allow them to use medical marijuana, and also creates a very limited system of growing marijuana in the state of Utah, which kind of blows my mind. I don't... Did you ever think you'd see a marijuana bill pass the legislature in Utah?
I've wanted to for a few years.
Well, yeah.
And whether people in Utah want to use cannabis or not, or whether they think it's good or bad, I think it's huge to come from a place that has been so traditionally opposed to legalizing it in any form under a Republican administration with a Republican AG who says he's going to crack down on marijuana, than to say, okay, well, we're going to allow some people. I mean, it's going to be very limited.
Very limited.
So marijuana activists shouldn't go crazy, be in support, like in excitement, like, oh, there's going to be legal weed everywhere in Utah. No. And then opponents should also not go crazy thinking like the world is, well, the world wouldn't end, but it's not going to be all over the place. It's very limited, but I think the impact of that psychologically is huge, especially when you've got a state, the voters of Oklahoma, another hard red state that, in fact, their AG tried to sue Colorado to stop their program. So you've got some states who have been traditionally opposed to this now coming around, not waiting for Washington, D.C., and just saying, you know what, screw it, we're going to do it anyways. And I think there are patients that can be helped. There are businesses that can be helped. And people can learn that you don't have to wait on Washington, D.C. to do what you want to do. Yeah,
and I'm hearing that the governor is going to sign this bill. That's the scuttlebutt. And I didn't realize this until I started kind of digging into the marijuana stuff there. They actually have a referendum on the ballot in November to legalize medical marijuana across the board.
Wow.
And from what I'm hearing and from the polling results I saw reported out of some of the Utah newspapers, there's about a 60-some% favorable on this referendum. So we may well see full medical marijuana legalization at the end of the year in Utah.
Take that, Jeff Sessions. Now let's see some states. Unfortunately, with so many Republican-controlled state legislatures around the country, I think it's like 30 something. And some organizations used to advertise, especially like the Convention of States Project, used to use that as like that was their big advertisement. There's a bunch of Republicans in charge in state houses, and Obama's in charge in Washington D.C. So we're going to be able to oppose that. Well, unfortunately, as soon as the Republicans get in power in Washington D.C., Republicans at the state level don't do things on things like guns. There are like a Second Amendment Preservation Act bills that have been filed in places like Tennessee, Missouri, Texas,
Oklahoma.
last session, Oklahoma, where they're not even giving it. There's the same legislators are trying to get it through. That did when Obama was in office. But instead of getting a hearing and a lot of support, no one's doing anything on it. It's as if gun control went away when Trump took power. And anyone who follows that issue should know that 1934 and 1968 didn't just vanish into thin air. And, well, the short version is if Utah can say no to Washington, D.C. on weed, Why can't they also do the same thing on the Gun Control Act of 1968?
Yep. Sanctuary cities for guns, man. That's the wave of the future. That's what we need. I mean, we've seen it with the immigration. Why can't you do that for guns? Why can't you create these areas where no cooperation with the enforcement of federal gun laws? Absolutely could do it. And for whatever reason, when it comes to that, everybody wants to run to Washington, D.C. I've said this before, and it makes people mad, but the people that are the marijuana activists are much better than the gun activists. They're much better at their strategy, and that's why you now have 30 states that have legalized marijuana in some form, and we're still piddling around trying to beg Congress not to pass the next round of gun control.
No more begging, as our good friend Robert Scott Bell always says. How does he say it? Stop asking for permission.
None is required.
Don't ask for permission where none is required, and especially on the right to keep and bear arms, the right of self-ownership, which includes self-defense, self-medication, your own personal choices. Self-ownership, this is a personal property rights issue, all of these across the spectrum. People should be able to make these choices without government interference, and we're doing our best to get government, at least at some levels, out of the way.
Yep.
And for those of you who support this work, this is to close it off here. Please consider signing up for a membership. They start at $2 a month at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. We absolutely couldn't get the work done that we do without your support. So thank you to everyone who is already supporting us. Thank you for those of you who are considering doing it. And thank you for those of you who will sign up in the very near future. Of course, tune in next week. We'll be here for another episode of 10th or Tuesday. Thank you so much for watching.
Thanks.